time in my life where I was like, holy cow.
We're at a major turning point. This is how we can do it.
Climate impact, that's the mission.
Innovation is the highest form of protest.
So I was first introduced to your work, I want to say like, in my head, it's 8 or 10 years ago, when I read Good is the New Cool, and I saw you at the Gathering. And I think for me, it was a really permission-filled moment to be like, oh, you can do good and do marketing and play in these spaces. But I know for you, your journey didn't start there. It started a lot earlier, sort of on the other side of the marketing world. Can you sort of take me into the origins of your career and the start of your storytelling?
Sure, yeah. I grew up in Sri Lanka, and when I was 18, I moved to London to study and work. And I kind of fell into marketing. I fell into working for Procter Gamble and Nokia in London, and then I moved to New York, worked for Heineken and Absolut Vodka. So I worked for all these amazing brands, all these fantastic companies, always doing marketing. And so I was doing brand storytelling, I guess, but I was doing it from the client perspective. And I was the one working with incredible advertising agencies, creative agencies. And somewhere along the way, you start to have these moments, these cracks where you start to like think about what you're really doing with your life, right? And one of those moments, I know in hindsight for me, a crucible moment, if you will, was being back in Sri Lanka for my brother's wedding in 2004. And what should have been a happy occasion turned into a tragedy because I was there during the Asian tsunami in 2004. And I kind of was miraculously unharmed. Like I woke up in a part of the country that wasn't hit by the wave, but woke up to like devastation around me, and that was a real crack in the universe where I did my best to help people in the country at that time for a few weeks, like doing emergency relief work. But then I had to go back to my job in marketing and suddenly be in the middle of an ad shoot going, what am I doing here? And like, what happened? And it was a really profound moment where I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I was diagnosed with a particular type called survivor guilt, which was why have you survived when those other people didn't, And so that question of why did I survive entered my brain at that moment. And I started to think about what is my purpose? What am I doing all this stuff for? So that was a real moment where a crack appeared, but I didn't immediately do anything about it, But then I had this kind of growing dissatisfaction with what I was doing. It was very glamorous and very cool, but there was no meaning behind it. And then the other moment was when I became a father, and I had a son. And I think this is the story I told at the Gathering when I'd been traveling for like a month straight, running around the world doing stuff, missing out on his life. And I had this heart-to-heart conversation with him on a park bench in the middle of snowy New York City. And I was telling him I'm sorry, that I was away from him so long, and and he said, "That's okay. I know your work is important." And he said, "Well, what do you do?" And I couldn't sit there and go, "I'm a vodka salesman. That's what I'm doing. I'm helping Absolut Vodka generate more sales." And so that was a real turning point where I said, "Okay, I need to do something more meaningful." And that's where I also met my dear friend and now business partner, Bobby Jones, who is another father going through the same conversation. What am I doing? And the two of us started writing a book, and that book was Good as a New Cool. And that book has led to this whole other chapter of my life, working in purpose and impact, and now storytelling for impact too.
I think one of the things I want to frame is you weren't working on little things. You know what I mean? Like you weren't just kind of your, an entry level marketing strategist or
Yeah.
something like that. You were working on massive, insane global campaigns. And I feel like so many people would find that thrilling, but you were finding it to be empty.
Yeah.
How did you start to discover purpose as a business mechanism?
Yeah. Well, I would say, what really powered the first 20 years of my career was a lot of it was my passion for music and pop culture. So I grew up as a kid in Sri Lanka going, I love this world. I want to be around it. And so throughout my career, I was the one connecting brands to pop culture. So I did that with Lady Gaga and Absolut Vodka and the TED conferences and Coachella. And so I was living my purpose, for that 20 years. And I was getting a huge amount of joy and meaning and satisfaction from it. So that was wonderful, right? But over time, purpose changes. It's a direction, not a destination, right? So it wasn't giving me meaning, right? And so that's where I had to go on this journey to find out what was meaningful. And so in those early days of writing this book and starting to see, hey, there's brands out there like the Patagonias, the Toms, all the famous examples of like, these are values-driven brands who are not just cool, but they're good, and people are really responding to them, and it's helping them achieve a tremendous amount of impact beyond the standard CSR philanthropy kind of model. The market hearing me was like, whoa, this is really interesting. I've never seen this before, and so hence the title of the book. It's to brands saying, brands, you need to think about doing good just like you think about being cool, and so I then uncovered this deep reservoir of stories and people and organizations doing really cool, really impactful work. And I kind of fell in love with that, just like I fell in love with music, And now, I write for Forbes. I've written like 500 Forbes articles, and my posture is like almost like a music journalist writing about bands I love, going, look at this incredible founder. Look at what she's doing with, tech education, And I write about them like a fan saying, hey, you guys should really listen to this, or like listen to this, person and what they're doing. That manifests in my keynotes, that manifests in GoodCon, the conferences we do. And now it's starting to manifest in brand storytelling with shows like The Solutionaries, which we'll talk about. So I'm really blessed that I've had two things I fell in love with, and impact was the second. And I'm still exploring it and still learning about it. And that passion point is what really has kept me going all this time.
When you started to investigate into that world of like, what is the purpose behind some of these companies? How are they doing good in the world? You've through good is the new cool, but also through Conspiracy of Love, you've worked with a lot of really interesting brands that like might not outwardly be as purpose forward as a Patagonia or a Tom's, where it's built into the business model. How are you leading those conversations and navigating that world with brands that we might not traditionally say are like a purpose-led company?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, what we try to do at Conspiracy of Love is really look at purpose as a driver of growth, really, right? And that's really the key distinction people sometimes miss. There have been manifestations of companies doing positive things for a long time. In the beginning, it was called philanthropy. Like companies would write checks and go, hey, Kiwanis Club of blah, 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 here's a check, right? Then it was called CSR, corporate social responsibility, right? And the next iteration was where it went from being kind of something defensive that it did just to be a good citizen to actually thinking about it as something that could be profitable. And that was the really interesting flywheel we were saying, like, hey, can you do good and make money? And so with each company, it was about going in there, really understanding their business model, helping them almost design like a bespoke suit to say, hey, this is the thing you should be really focused on. Adidas, you should be focused on women and girls in sport. If there's a huge deficit where women and girls stop playing sport, and it causes all sorts of negative outcomes, physiological, psychological, economic. And so if you interceded and said, hey, we're going to put all of our efforts into helping them stay in sport, it's great societally. Guess what? It's great for your business. Because guess what they're all going to be needing when they play sport? They're going to need your soccer boots and your, apparel. And so in each time, all these different companies, it was trying to find that issue or cause So it wasn't just like spray and pray and like just pick something. It was saying, no, this is the thing where if you get it right, it's good for the world, it's good for you guys as well, you know? And so that was the last decade of my life that I spent trying to do this. The world has changed, you know, quite drastically. And there's some, let's call them headwinds against this idea. But I still believe the core idea is strong, you know, and I think maybe it's just the manifestations of it that we now have to think about what's the next manifestation of it, you know?
I love it. It's your approach to impact is very similar to how I think about stories for brands,
Mm.
which is you can't tell any story, but there are lanes of storytelling that you're particularly well suited
Yeah.
to approach and
Yeah.
to tell and to explore in really unique ways. And we see a lot of them at these brand storytelling events, and we see a lot of them in the world. But that's sort of the core of that idea. It's very similar, right? Don't just make a movie to make a movie, but what's a value, what's a connection that you have into the DNA.
Mm.
So it went from good as the new cool to now 3 books,
Mhm.
all sort of in and around similar topic, but with a slightly different
Yeah.
focus. I could ask you about the books, but I'm actually going to ask you about the process of writing the books.
Mm.
As a storyteller, what did you learn from that first book that you've carried through into these latest 2?
Yeah. So it's interesting. When we started writing the first book, we didn't know what we were writing about, right? We didn't go in to say, we're going to write a book about brand purpose. It was like, we're frustrated marketers. How do we go just talk to people who we admire and who are doing stuff that we think is really cool? And fortunately, we were connected enough that we could just, you know, pick up a Rolodex, not a Rolodex, who has a Rolodex, you know, get in touch with people and say, would you mind talking to us? And so literally, you know, I would sit in the lunch break in a little kind of like phone booth and interview somebody. And like, you know, and it's only in reverse, we went, oh, hang on a second. This is talking about this idea that brands should do something positive in the world. And let's put forward a thesis of how they should do it, a methodology. And it's really investigative journalism. It's like, let's go talk to all of these companies. And then from that, reverse engineer some principles. And so it was a very simple way of looking at it. And so that's where we started doing that. The book led to speaking. The speaking put us inside these companies like Pepsi and Mondelez and Adidas and Sephora, who then turned around and said, hey, can you help us with this stuff? And so we set up Conspiracy of Love to say, okay, let's help you navigate this. And then when we were kind of deep in that brand purpose world, we started to see corporate purpose now really manifest at a organizational level. And now it became not just about consumers, but employees hungry for meaning in their work. And so we were like, oh, there's a second book here. So let's go talk to people, leaders who are finding a really great way to empower their employees to find purpose. So Paul Polman and Unilever and all these people. And again, go on this journey to just use your intuition to go, oh man, that company's got a really good company culture. Like, what's the secret to that, you know? And go there and discover what's under the hood, you know? And then the third book, which is the aha moment, which is, it's no point us, coming up with a fantastic purpose statement for a company if the people inside it didn't also think about their own purpose. And that was almost the hardest book to write because it's such a personal journey to go on, you know? And that became the GPS to Purpose book. And so there's a unified field theory of purpose. It's like everything we know, guys, here's the blueprint. If you follow this, you should be able to succeed in it. And so that storytelling instinct is really powered by a journalistic instinct and by people and stories of people. We call it actually data, knowledge, and wisdom, right? There's data out there, which is really useful as a starting point, or as a sometimes as a punctuation mark. Then you go talk to people, and their stories have knowledge in them. But the trick is, how do you combine the data and the knowledge to then distill it into wisdom and come up with an idea like, purpose is about picking your sword versus your shields, like how a company should really be choiceful about what its impact area is and distilling it down to principles. So everybody goes, okay, now I get it. And then that becomes the backbone of our consulting practice, our keynotes, our conferences, everything else. So it's really a meaning discovery journey that we go on each time,
When did you cross from, I mean, you've always been a storyteller, but when did you cross from, I'm going to call it more a consultancy, even though that kind of is not encompassing of what you do. But at what point did you start to go, I want to put stories in the world?
Yeah, we do all of this strategy work for companies. And oftentimes the external manifestation of it was underwhelming storytelling. I call it the 2,000 views on YouTube problem, right? They'd come up with something, but the storytelling was deeply unsexy. And it would just sit there with nobody watching it, nobody paying attention to it. And we're always like, there's got to be a better way, And it actually, I remember working on a project for Nike who said, why does our advertising content get like 40 million views the minute we drop it, but our impact content gets 0 views? And so there's a gulf, right? And so that was a really interesting brief to go, hey, as marketers, we used to create incredible campaigns, and why can't we bring some of that magic and that, energy into impact storytelling, And so I actually took a step back from Conspiracy of Love. I have wonderful partners who ran it. And I went on this kind of journey to really look at impact storytelling and going, what's really happening here? Who's doing it well? And what are some of the traps that companies fall into, right? So trap number one is tone. When and it's a really hard problem. If you're talking about something serious, your tone can't be bubbly and frothy and light, right? But if you're Oreo cookies, brand we worked on, like your impact storytelling can't be dark and earnest and worthy, right? So oftentimes there's a mismatch in tone that brands really struggle to figure out, in that model. And I think that's where the light bulb went off, where we were like, well, good is the new cool has another meaning to it, which is, what if you wrap cool around good, right? And so that set off a journey to really think about developing stories and ideas that could make that leap, into being content that's really interesting and engaging to watch, still does the brand messaging job, but now borrows from great film, TV, advertising, all of those tricks to make something visually stimulating, aesthetically interesting. Our eyes are so well trained now that in 1 second, we'll make a decision about whether to watch something. It's like you're scrolling, you're like, no, like that. Like, oh, okay, I'll give it, And so that's the level that impact storytelling has to play at now, right? So, and I can tell you a story about like how we went from the consulting to storytelling by giving you one case study, if that helps.
Yeah, we'd love it. Yeah.
So the Solutionaries project with the Project Management Institute is a great example of this. We went and worked on the consulting side for this incredible organization called the Project Management Institute. It's the largest educational training certification body for project managers, which is a great job. People can get fantastic careers out of it. And the CMO, Manika Gopinath, is amazing. She's a dear friend of ours. And we came in and we did this foundational work about what is the purpose of this incredible, I think, 60-year-old organization, right? And we articulated this purpose, their purpose was to maximize project success, to elevate our world. In the shorthand is, you can have all the great ideas in the world, but if you can't execute it, you're dead in the water. So that's where the Project Management Institute comes in. And I had been working on this idea for a show called The Solutionaries for a while now, since 2020, a long time, and I came across this word Solutionaries, which has been around in the ether for a while. And I was like, that's a great word. And our definition was somebody who had a game-changing, revolutionary solution to the problems of the world. And I remember shopping the show to like CNBC or, linear channels who were all like, can you make this Dragon's Den? Can you make this Shark Tank?
Yeah, how is it a competition?
How's a competition? How is it a reality show? And
Yeah.
people were like, that's a terrible idea. Like if you wanted to do that, So it kind of sat on the shelf. But when we were working with PMI, we were like, hang on a second. We have this incredible bank of stories of people like Dr. Lisa Dyson, who's working on air protein. So literally making protein out of air. It's a game-changing food climate solution. Cyril Gutsch, Poly for the Oceans, coming up with biofabrics to replace fossil fuel plastic. Really game-changing things. And we're like, hey, all these guys are project managers working for them. They're the ones who actually take this insane idea and execute it. And so that became the perfect show to actually bring this purpose statement to life, And we have great partners at Time Studios, Jess Sibley, the CEO of Time. She took a look at the show and she's like, we got to do this here. This is amazing, And so fast forward to a year later, and I'm sitting in Paris watching this kind of camera crew shoot this incredible show going, what just happened here? Like we went from this never occurring to now being a really beautiful production. If you go watch the films online, we had an incredible director, Buck, and the music, the editing, the visuals, the graphics, the archival is world class, right? And so that became like our first proof of concept to say, hey, you can make really interesting impact storytelling, and now it beautifully does what the brand needs it to, but it can have a tremendous amount of impact in the world today as well.
I feel like the obvious and necessary question is, when you set out to create that project, sort of in partnership with the Institute and Time, what were your goals with the show, or what were the brand's goals with the show? And how has season 1 performed against those?
Yeah, well, it's performed well enough that they greenlit season 2. So there you go. That's
Yeah.
that's the headline. That's the exclusive. The whole thing was about how do you make people realize that project management is a cool career, right? They weren't trying to pitch a product or anything. It was really a kind of like a perception shift, right? And so that's where if you go and look at all the stories, there's the main story, and then there's like a shoulder content, which is the project management click down into the project manager's story behind the solutionary, All of that stuff is running on Time's ecosystem, is promoted there, and it's linking back into PMI's ecosystem so that they could look at lead generation and things like that as well. So it really was about showcasing project management not as this kind of support role, back office behind the scenes, but as like crucial partners in making change happen in the world, And that's where all of the feedback that we're getting is that this is really powerful. Like project managers don't get portrayed like this, And so that's why I think we're really pleased with that. But more to the point, now we've unlocked a model, right? Where we have either we have an idea for a show, and now we can sit there and go, oh, it's a food show. So these food brands could be really interesting to go and talk to and see how we can integrate into their purpose and impact strategy. Or because we're still working with some of these clients, we know what their impact strategy is that they're going to announce next year. And so we can forward plan and say, here is an idea that we've written for you guys as a bespoke treatment that perfectly fits into the narrative. And so we call it strategy to story. It's like we're doing the strategy on the inside. Let us help you with the story on the outside, and those things work perfectly together.
With how much, you mentioned earlier, obviously the world is changing, right? It's a very different political space, but also brand space, consumer space. Like there's lots of different pieces at play. For you, what role do you see brands having in how they tell stories like this and the types of stories they can or should be
Yeah.
putting in the world?
So I think we need to have a reckoning in the purpose and impact space as to the manifestation of how it happened. With hindsight, you get a bit of clarity to go, okay, what happened is brands and corporations um, absorbed impact so fast, triggered by COVID, the murder of George Floyd, all these things. And they kind of wholesale borrowed language and structure from academia and social justice and kind of just rammed it into corporate ecosystems. And in hindsight, that's like I now think about it like almost as like a kidney transplant where the body rejected the organ. You know, it happened so fast and so dramatically that it caused ruptures. It caused distrust inside an organization. It made employees not trust each other because suddenly there was all these conversations about race and gender, and there was a lot of othering that happened as well. And so it was always an uneasy fit, especially in a corporation, which is its whole job is just to make money. It's not there to be in a laboratory of social justice, right? And so I think you could see the rumblings inside companies, and then you obviously had a shift in the political environment where suddenly all of these brands were being attacked for being woke and for being, too progressive. Very well concerted backlash happened, and then the Trump administration was the icing on the cake. And so what happened was those brands dropped all of it as fast as they took it up. And it's a real tragedy because I think about this now, right? If we had had a more measured approach to it and said, okay, to your point, like not every company needs to become a social justice warrior lecturing the populace about rights and about how they should live their lives and becoming quite didactic. When you go back and go look at the underlying need, there is still a need for employees to find meaning in their work. There's still a hunger from communities to have the companies and brands in their lives do something positive. There's still a need on a world stage to tackle things like climate change. Those problems have gone away, but the manifestation needs to change, right? And so I think it's time for like a new playbook, right? And some of the pieces of it are more listening, less lecturing, uh, more thinking about the bespoke suit thing, saying we don't have to have a position on every single social issue. This is the thing we're really going to focus on. It's in line with our business model. We're just going to stick to this. It's funny. Last year we worked with both U.S. Steel and Sephora. I love both those companies. I could not think of two more different companies, right? U.S. Steel is about the heartland and jobs and local communities and bringing manufacturing back to America and all of this stuff. And Sephora is about inclusion and dignity and self-respect. Do I expect U.S. Steel to have a transgender rights agenda? No, I don't, right? Do I think it's great for Sephora? Yes, absolutely, right? And so that's what I mean. Instead of a one size fits all, let's just all take a breath and let's go, okay, every company can do something positive. What is that positive thing? And now let's think about the strategy to get there and the storytelling that backs it up, I hope that's what's coming next, but it's hard because companies are now have economic aftershocks with things like the tariffs, right? Which are making the good stuff be almost, a nice to have as opposed to something core, And so that's where I look at the long arc of history and I go back to the fact that there was philanthropy and CSR before. We had this thing for the last 10 years. There'll be something else. And my job is to help advise our clients on what that next thing is and find a path through it.
Um, I feel like that ties to, it's like the economic study that was about like how to impact led brands compared to like shareholder led brands
Yeah.
and the impact brands over a 25-year horizon always outperform the fast money.
Yeah.
But I feel like, especially with social media and how much things have changed and the speed everyone wants everything, that no one's looking at their investment portfolio like, what's the next 25 years?
Yeah.
And so the short termism
Yeah.
is a big hurdle
Yeah.
in that world. Before I get to the rapid fire, I also wanted to touch on, we've talked a lot about work and about, and about the work you put in the world. But I also know, uh, I don't know if it's a passion project, but you had a personal film
Yeah.
that you've also put into the world. And so I wanted to make sure we touched on that. I still haven't had a chance to see it, but I'm still very excited to
Oh
see it.
yeah. Yeah.
But I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about what it is and why you decided to make it.
Yeah. So I directed an architectural documentary, 72-minute feature doc about this legendary Sri Lankan architect called Jeffrey Bawa. And I went and shot 5 of his buildings, and it became like this love letter to him, love letter to the country. And I realize now, one reason I did it was to give back to Sri Lanka, to give jobs to Sri Lankan filmmakers. This is in the wake of COVID when the industry had died, to put Sri Lanka on the map and get more people to come to it. It's a full circle moment from the tsunami almost, to say, oh, okay, this is something I can do that's tangible. But it was also part of a shift to myself to be more directly involved in the creative process, to go from being the client or the producer to being the director and the writer. And I realized this is really the next phase of my evolution. I want to actually make stories myself. I loved being on set shooting with like 2 cameras here and a drone operator and like all that stuff. I became addicted to it, And I think that's where the really exciting part of my life is I now get to go and learn about the art and craft of visual storytelling, and now dive into this new ocean, and I'm really excited by that. I went and shot a 6-part series on Sri Lankan food last year. That was hilarious. That was really fun, and so like getting my chops in as a director to learn how to tell stories. And I think that's where this new evolution of Good is a New Cool into a creative studio. I'm watching these really great directors. I'm working with them going, how do I do that next? So that's also part of my evolution.
What have you learned in that process of telling your own stories from your own voice that surprised you?
It's funny. It goes back to purpose. I remember, the first night I was shooting with the Sri Lankan crew, like 15, 20 guys and girls, and had a big dinner for them. And I said to them, hey, this film isn't just like a passion project, or a vanity project from me. I'm doing this. Our job is to make Sri Lanka look so beautiful that people will want to come here and it will help our country. And from talking to people on that shoot, they were like, that's the moment we all went from, okay, this is the job, to like, okay. And everybody found a higher gear. Like people were like going above and beyond to like get the shot, like to, work hard. And so the real takeaway for me was imbue that purpose into creative projects and explain to people, this isn't just a job. This is the reason we're doing this. And people will find that gear that comes from meaning, not just money, and the end result is going to be even better than you imagined it. And I'll tell you a quick story. To the full circle moment was when I was watching the film at the architecture and design, actually at the Newport Beach Film Festival. We kind of like showed it there, and I was sitting at the back looking down because I'd seen the film 1,000 times in the edit. I knew it, so I was just watching the people, and I saw a phone come out, and I was like, how dare you take a phone out in the screening? And then I kind of leaned over, it was a couple of rows down, and I could see this person was looking up flights to Sri Lanka while watching the film. And I was like, job done, mission accomplished, And so that was a really nice full circle moment.
For you, and I feel like this is like, there's an obviousness in this question
Yeah.
as well, but as you were looking at stories you could tell, and there's 8 billion people, and there's so many stories you could tell. Um, what was it about making sure you're celebrating Sri Lankans, celebrating the country, celebrating these stories that was really important to you to almost what I was going to say go back to your roots, but it like literally your roots.
Yeah.
Um, why was it so important for you to go, if I'm going to put something of myself into the world, I want it to be about where I'm from?
Yeah. It's a great question. Sri Lanka's always been like my creative muse. I've written poetry, books of fiction, this doc, and there's a magical spiritual quality to the place. It's very easy to fall in love with it. And I think that's where it's an incredible canvas and a backdrop for storytelling. It's very cinematic. It's very stunning. But it was really like the way I explain to people, like I work in impact and I'm passionate about a wide range of causes, like climate change, mental health, whatever. But I really it took a while for me to realize like my personal passion wasn't a cause, it was a country. It was Sri Lanka. And so much of what I do now is about shining a light on it, on its beautiful people, about giving jobs to filmmakers and creatives there. And so it'll continue for the rest of my life. And I can never do enough to pay it back for what it gave me. But that's where there's a layers of meaning when I go back and do projects there that really make a difference.
As someone who's had a lot of sort of twists and turns in your life to where you are today in your career, what would you say to people that like might be getting that like spiritual tickle of
Yeah,
like, oh, I like what I do, but I think this thing adjacent to it is what's pulling me.
yeah.
You strike me as someone who said yes a lot.
Mm,
Like, oh, this thing's pulling at me. Let's unravel this thread.
yeah,
And that turned into a decade with a whole new sense of purpose. I feel like a lot of people are afraid to make that leap.
yeah.
So what would you say to people, or what would your words be around pulling that
That's right.
thread
Yeah.
and not being afraid to make big pivots?
Yeah, so I was telling you before we started recording that last year at the age of 51, I got diagnosed with ADHD. So that might have something to do with it, where I'm like, ooh, shiny objects, let's go over here. Um, when I look at it, the common thread is stories. Everything that has powered my life for the last 52 years has been about storytelling and becoming a better and better storyteller. So stories are like the code, that I have. And so all of these forays have just been into different types of storytelling and learning how to become better. But what I'd say is you have to follow that tickle, because that tickle is your intuition telling you there's something here. And ultimately the goal is energy, because if you follow something and it gives you energy because it's meaningful, because it's purposeful, because you're passionate about it, you become better at it because your energy is focused on becoming really good at it. And then you become successful at it and people start to give you money for it, you know? And so that's where you might have a season of your life where that changes again, and you have to follow it, because otherwise you're going to end up in a place where you're doing something which you don't have that same sense of meaning. It will not give you that energy and you will not stay good at it. And so I'm writing a new book about authenticity now, and that is really the core of authenticity is consciously thinking about yourself at every stage of your life and going, is this the most authentic version of myself? Even if it doesn't make sense to other people, I'm going to follow this because I don't want to look back at my life and go, man, I wish I did that. And so that would be my message is, carpe diem, carpe the dream. That's whatever is out there. I go for it.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, before I let you go, I've got my my not so rapid fire.
Go for it.
The first is, what is one story, and it can be in any medium, that's had an impact on your life, and why?
Oh my God, you're asking a story junkie if
Yeah.
one story has
That's had an
a
impact, not the best.
yeah.
What's one story that's really stayed with you for one reason or another?
There's two movies which I love, which I keep coming back to again and again, and you're gonna laugh when I tell you them. One is Mr. Holland's Opus. I don't know if you remember the story,
Yeah, of
like
course.
Richard Dreyfuss, great, you know, about a music teacher who, you know, gives up his dream to teach kids. Um, and the other one is Pay It Forward, which is a very unknown Kevin Spacey, you know, movie about a kid who comes up with an idea to change the world. And both of these maybe leave me in tears every time I watch them, you know. And I was trying to figure out what they have in common, and they're both about the kindness of strangers who show up to help somebody, you know. And I love that theme. I love that idea, and it always leaves me with a lump in my throat. And I think that's where part of the reason I write about all these change makers, you know, and people who are trying to make the world better is because they're heroes, and you know, I think I want to help support their work, you know. So that idea of the kindness of strangers is something that's really powerful to me.
The second question kind of eats your first question, but it's what's one film you
Mhm.
think everyone should watch?
That's a great question. I've actually this Christmas I went down a big letterboxed kind of like nerd rabbit hole and started collecting, you know, putting together different stories and kind of lists. What's one movie everybody should watch? That's a tough one. I'm gonna go with um, this movie called. You're gonna laugh at it. Um, Ghost Dog by Jim Jarmusch, which I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No, I haven't.
It's just an amazing movie with Forrest Whitaker as a samurai ninja warrior who lives in a rooftop with pigeons. And I happen to be watching it over Christmas, and it's a stunning film with music by the Wu-Tang Clan and RZA. I know.
Wild.
I don't know. Watch it. I
I
love it.
like every element of the way you have described this movie.
There's no you know there's ultraviolet and there's no like, you know, impact story, but it's really cool.
I love it. What's something you never leave home without?
I never leave home without my Apple AirPods because I realize now they especially now with like ADHD, like having music that's very calming and soothing helps me focus. So they've turned from something I would listen to podcasts and things on to like almost being like a sonic layer that allows me to really kind of maintain calm in a otherwise frenetic world.
I love it. I can very much resonate with that.
Yeah.
Um, where is one important place for you to go to find inspiration?
Sri Lanka. Come on.
I feel like I knew the answer to that one as I was asking.
That was easy. Yeah, we covered it. Everybody should go to Sri Lanka. It's incredible. It will be it here's my 10-second pitch. It is a magical spiritual island as good as Maui, Bali, Ibiza, or you know, any of those places, and it will heal you at the same time as inspiring you.
I love it. What is the most important skill for a storyteller to develop?
Listening. Yeah, listening to the story, listening to the people telling the story, listening to the people around you who are helping you, you know, tell the story. It's you sometimes get so excited about putting your story out into the world, you don't realize it's a living, breathing thing, and it changes. And if you're too didactic about it, and you're just like, nope, this is the way it's got to be, you'll miss out on the serendipity and the magic of what the story is telling you it should be. So really listen when you're trying to be a storyteller. That's what I would say.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Braden. Great to see you.
You as well.